This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 385 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about women in history and travel to celebrate International Women's Day for 2026. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation where I'm recording this podcast. Now, last year for International Women's Day, you might recall that I chatted with a bunch of Australian women podcasters about amazing women in travel, people we'd met, people who inspired us. It was a super positive episode, and this year I want to highlight a few of the difficulties. Not like the obvious, it's less safe for a woman to walk alone at night in a city they're visiting, that kind of stuff, although I would argue that it is less safe, but a couple of other aspects of how it's not always easy being a woman. I'm not going to get all mega feminist and preachy. That's not my style here, but I still want to highlight a few. Well, we've got a few interesting stories and stuff to share as well. So later on in the episode, I have an interview with Nikki Padilla Rivera, and she's involved in a very special kind of tour, so we will get to that. But first up, I wanted to report back on a chat I had in the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group with some of you lovely listeners about a particular question women are often asked on their travels and its variations. So this has actually never happened to me, but I've heard many female friends report that when they're travelling alone, people will ask them weird questions about this. Now, obviously, in the timeline of history, it's a pretty new thing that women would travel the world alone. Although to me, of course, it seems like a perfectly normal thing to do. But also, of course, lots of courses today, there are unfortunately varied levels of rights available to women depending on where they live. And as much as I sometimes think it's frustrating to be a woman in Australia, I know that in the scheme of things, I am really very lucky. Anyway, in the Facebook group, I asked if any women had been ever asked something like, "Why does your husband let you travel alone?" And this is what you told me. So first up, Linley said, "Mike, her husband, and I often travel independently and also together. We have ever since the first day we met. I do get asked often, and people are fascinated how it works, or if chatting with a couple, my answers can be confronting if they haven't solo travelled. Trust, respect, and being confident with oneself, I often get told that I am brave." So this level is a nice kind of a cultural curiosity, which I can live with, but it's not always like that, is it? This answer from one of my regular travel companions, Catherine, made me laugh. She said, "I was once asked if my husband let me travel alone. I said, yes, and I let him travel alone too." A good quick response. And there's kind of a third version of this too. Leslie said, "Not really. I have a fairly assertive personality. I don't think people dare." And Laura said ditto. So not everybody gets asked. And yeah, I can see there could be a reason for this. Mariellen is based in India, and she said, yes, I travel and live in India. If I had a dime for every time I get asked, are you married? But I always answer, nope, no husband, no kids, with a gleeful smile to indicate how happy I am about it. It's also a good response. So lots of similar stories from all around the world. For example, Vinci said, "When I was volunteering in Rwanda, everyone asked me why I went there alone and why I wasn't married. I told them I was divorced and was happy to be single. It was the hardest thing for the locals to comprehend." And Fiona, who spent a lot of time in Sri Lanka, said, "Every day in Sri Lanka, I got so tired of it and all the associated questions. I ended up wearing a ring and telling them he was joining me next week," which is a good strategy. Now, this doesn't seem to only happen where you might think that the cultural differences are more stark. And Deb mentioned this from a trip to the UK. "He allowed you to come here alone, and does he know you're here?" From two different people. Interestingly, one by a woman and the other by a man. It happened in the UK. The woman was from Australia and part of a small group I toured with. She obviously was with her husband, and the man who commented was German. So it is not only the societies where we think women have fewer rights that people sometimes are wondering, why are these women travelling without their husbands? And finally, Alex mentioned an incident in Turkey. She said, I've had that happen to me in Turkey. I had recently been widowed at the time and was travelling with my 2 little kids. First question, are these your children? Second question, where is your husband? Third question, now I won't repeat it, but it was a crude question, let's say. This was about 15 years ago now. Thankfully, since then, when I've travelled alone, I have been asked about travelling without my new husband, but it was with a genuine sense of interest, in some cases admiration, how we make it work rather than a case of my husband letting me go. Yeah, I feel much happier about the more recent version where people are trying to understand cultural differences. 2 of my favourite Thoughtful Traveller men, Sang and Book Club Justin, also weighed in to mention they're often asked many questions when travelling with female friends who are just friends. In many countries, they've had many questions because some cultures apparently can't understand that a single man would travel with a single woman as friends. And of course, in some cultures, it wouldn't even be allowed. But as they said, and of course I agree, it is the women who get the brunt of the unwanted attention and endless questions. It'd be nice to not have to deal with this, but I guess in most of the places where this is common, it's not something that we as travellers from other countries can change or should change. So some of the quick answers that deal with it from some of the tips above, I guess, are probably the best solution. Now, we might not change much in a hurry about these kind of annoyances, but there are definitely things we can do if we are wanting to resurrect the rights of women from the past. And that's the focus of the second part of this episode today. I have increasingly read accounts of women who've been left out of history. If I think back to my studies of history in school, even, the vast majority of the historical figures, the heroic actions, they all seem to be undertaken by men. Not all, but, a vast majority. And my guest today has a great take on this. If you're in Australia, you might have already heard of the She Shapes History walking tours, which began just a few years back. Essentially, these are tours which share stories of women in history in several East Coast cities in Australia so far. I recently chatted with Nikki Padilla Rivera, who is in the process of setting up the New York City branch of She Shapes History, and I asked her how this all came about and why it's so important for women and the world.
Sita Sargent starts She Shapes History 4 years ago. I happened to be connected with her because I was hosting a podcast called Tourpreneur. I was hosting a series where you would follow a new business over time. So every month you would check in with them and you would hear how it's going. Sita had written to the person who ran the podcast, Shane, and she said, I would love to be on the podcast. I've listened to it. I'm starting this tour company. I would love to be on the podcast. And so Shane, in fact, that's why he reached out to me. He was like, hey, this woman company, they're doing tours on women. I feel like a woman should host it. Why don't you come and host this? So we met then at the very, very start when she was first starting it. Cut to 4 years later, this has blown up in Australia. If you haven't heard of it, She Shapes History, look it up, go on a tour. Sita recently won ACT Young Australian of the Year. She's getting these insane grants. She has politicians DMing her on Instagram. It's huge. And we could unpack why, but I just think right time, right place in Australia. 4 years ago, Sita started it because she woke up and one day learned, in her 20s, that Canberra was actually the city plan of Canberra was designed by a woman. And she was like, see, you didn't know that. So she was like, I am a feminist. I am into history. I've lived in Canberra all my life. How have I never heard this fact? And this is what really catapulted her of we need to get this information out there of Australians. We don't know women Australian history. And so the tours were simply a means to get the story out. She did not seek out to start a tour company. So it's huge. She's now, at the time of this recording, in 3 cities. It's Melbourne, Canberra, and Sydney. They're going to be all over Australia by the end of this year. And so I've kept in touch with Sita all these years because it's such an amazing thing. And she mentioned to me, I'm thinking about outside Australia, what would that look like and how could I expand? And I mean, the very short version of this is I was like, I have to do this. This has to be in New York City. This would be so good. I introduced her to someone who I knew would be perfect to run it. And we decided to do it together. Beth Santos, my partner, who runs wonderful and amazing network of female travelers, is obviously such a champion of women and storytelling and women storytellers. And I call her an adult entrepreneur. She's gone to business school and she opens businesses, and no, that is not my skill set. So I'd originally pitched it to her, but I know tours. I've always worked in tourism. I started as a tour guide way back when. So we're a great pair. So we decide we're going to open it. We tell Sita, we want to do this. And, this is the first time it's ever happened. Sita runs everything. Like now she has 2 full-time employees for the first time, but she has her hand in everything. Like this is the first time that she wouldn't be there sculpting every single element. So she's like, great, come to Australia. You have to come on the tours. And we were like, what? We both have young kids. Like literally the only week she was available because, she's doing press and all this stuff. We had to go the week before our Thanksgiving. So it was like it was the first time I left my 1-year-old at home. Like it was like a huge, it really felt like, okay, we're doing this.
Yeah, we're all in.
So Beth and I go to Australia. We go on all the tours. We meet all the teams. And, I've been on more tours than any human should ever go on, like throughout my career. So I've been on
Good
tours.
and bad, I can imagine.
Yeah, good. Oh, mostly bad. And that's a whole nother podcast. But Beth will, kept like poking me and saying, this is not a tour. This is not a tour. And she's right. Like it is so hard to describe, but this is not this building was erected in this year and this is the architect. This is, as I said before, a means to get these stories out there. So, I'm going thinking, what am I going to really feel invested in Australian history? I don't have any background. Like I'm not going to feel so connected to it. But you were hearing these stories and you were like, this is important. I'm witnessing these stories. I now know these stories. I know these women's names. And now I'm going to go and share these stories because that is the work. And it was so empowering. It was so incredible. So that's what we're trying to duplicate in New York City. And it's been really interesting. Sita really, probably against her better judgment, was like, go ahead, go do it. Like she's, at our disposal and she's very happy to be hands-on, but she's given us so much trust that we are so grateful for. And we're currently, as we record this, I'm drafting the first tour. We're going to have our first press tour this weekend. And it's going to be about 10 to 15 women. My criteria as I'm doing the research is, does my mom know this woman? Because my mom is lifelong New Yorker, second wave feminist. She's a huge history fan, loves historical novels, has read every like murder mystery historical novel of New York City series that ever exists, which there's a lot of them. So she knows, like, this is her stuff, And so whenever I find a woman, like, have you heard, Mom, of Frances Perkins? Have you heard of Mabel Pinkwali? And when she says no, I'm like, oh, great, she can be in the tour. Like, we really want to be women you've absolutely never heard of.
But who are super important, and the world would be different without them, or New York would be different without them.
1,000%. The world truly, but the United States, like these women have completely changed society and the way we think, and they've invented things, and we just, for so many reasons, they have been completely left out of the narrative.
Yeah, why do they get, I have some broad ideas, but why mostly do they get left out?
So you have to think about how we remember people, right? Like history is passed on by the victors, as they say, the people recording these histories. So the victors are, the people in power. You're usually talking about white men. The people who are recording these histories historically are people of power, white men. So they're writing this history as they understand it, as they remember it. So it's their version of it, what makes them look good, right? Who is paying for plaques? Who is paying for statues? This is a big thing in Australia, right? There are very low percentage of statues of females. And that's the same in the United States. 6% of statues in the United States are actual historical women, not just like a beauty, standing holding a water jug. Who's paying for those statues? It's these companies that are run by men. It is not intentional necessarily, but it happens. And this is why we've ended up where we are. It's also more complicated to include these women. So Mabel Pinkwali, who's one of my favorites, she worked towards women's suffrage. So when we were fighting for suffrage in the United States and in New York, she was a huge part of that. She led parades. She was a huge activist in this. However, she could never vote herself at that time because she was Chinese American. And due to the Chinese Exclusion Act, she had no path to nationality. So that is complicated. How do you include that in the narrative, even if the women that we do know from women's suffrage in the United States, for them to include her would make them look bad. It would make, because they're utilizing this woman. They want her to be the face of one of the parades. They put her on horseback in the front to show that everyone, look, even the Chinese Americans want this. Like they utilized her difference, but there was no room for her in this movement. It was completely erased, any sort of diversity within being a female. So it's complicated. It's complicated and it's awkward and it doesn't feel great. But I feel like we're in a time in our world, in society, where we can have these conversations. People are open to these conversations. We have the words to have these conversations. And one thing that Sita has done so well in the tours is that when you go on them, it's actually very hard to do. It is very much, these are the facts as we know them. And now there's not a lot of resources, especially if you want original sources, because these women haven't been written about. So you have very limited sources. They are very, in some cases, biased for or against. You are not getting the full picture. You're not getting all the facts. So how do you deliver those as these are the facts? This is where they came from. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to tell you whether she was good or bad or what. I'm simply here to tell you what she did. And that was the most incredible part for me about the tours.
Oh, amazing. And so important.
Yeah, they're so good. They're so good. And what was really incredible too is it's so, I joked before that most tours are bad. The average walking tour is very passive. It's like the guide giving the facts. It's a lecture. And yes, it's information and that's valuable in a way. But I feel that tours, to have these transformational experiences, it needs to be active in some way. I think we're past that point where we want tours to be passive. Experiences is used all the time now because I think people are seeking that out. So it's so wonderful about these tours. You have these women, I mean, you're spending it's 10 minutes, right? It's like maybe 5 to 10 minutes about this woman and then you move on to the next one. So as you're walking, you're only getting glimpses. You're not getting every single detail. But the beauty of that is one great example is there's a woman in Melbourne. You'll have to go on the tour to find out about her because I don't remember all the details, but she was real badass. She was in jail all the time. She was a pickpocket and, there's lots of reasons because of that. And she ended up in this neighborhood that had lots of thieves and, sort of the other side of the tracks. And she has a plaque now. This plaza where that neighborhood was is now very nice. And they have all these little cute shops. And they have a plaque of her. Her name escapes me. But they have a plaque of her. And it labels her as a prostitute. And now on the tour, they're saying she might have very well been a prostitute. That was kind of the crowd she was hanging out with and it would have made sense. But we don't know that for sure. And how interesting that even in recognizing this woman, we've distilled it down to prostitute. We've put that label onto her. So the beauty is it's you can have these conversations. The guide gave that information and literally said that fact. I just find it interesting that we've chosen to label her as prostitute. Anyway, moving on. And so they moved on and so now me and Beth are oh my God, it makes you think of so many things. You're connecting, you're talking to other people in the group. It really starts conversation. It really gets you thinking. And you truly do leave this tour thinking how can I shape history? Which maybe sounds a little corny to say, but that it doesn't mean you don't have to lead a suffrage march for a vote that you could never get yourself. You could simply, as I said at the beginning, hear these stories and hold them and share them. That's it. That could be doing something.
So interesting. The work of illuminating these women's stories is super important and fascinating, I think. And of course, we're focusing on women because it's International Women's Day in this episode, but the same principles apply for other minorities and any group underrepresented in history. It made me think of a lot of the Indigenous history in Australia that we know barely anything about. I remember only a few years back first learning about a massacre of Indigenous people near Busselton, a place I've been to so many times. And it's actually a really pivotal part of the history of the region, but it was, it was still not particularly widely known or talked about. I just, I came across some information about it just because I was going, really deep into a particular beach. And I'm still shocked that kind of stuff isn't more widely known. So these kinds of tours, whoever they're highlighting, they really work towards all of these important stories being widely known, and that's very important. So if you're in New York City or going there soon, make sure you hop on a She Shapes History pop-up tour. I hope they're successful enough to become ongoing in the way that they are in Australia. Sounds like a really cool way to learn more about the hidden history of New York City. Of course, if you're in Australia, these are well entrenched now. They're currently running in Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra and Wollongong, with apparently expansion on the way. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much for listening to episode 385 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. If you want to know more about She Shapes History, the walking tours, just go to sheshapeshistory.com. And if you're curious to hear last year's episode for International Women's Day, it was episode 340. Some really lovely conversations and just great women highlighted. And that's at notaballerina.com/340. Don't forget to come and join our Facebook and LinkedIn groups for Thoughtful Travellers, or sign up for the Thoughtful Travellers newsletter at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. These links and more are in the show notes. For this episode, they are at notaballerina.com/385. Happy International Women's Day, and as always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.